So let's talk a little bit about Friday night's game. It was the Black Friday game. Clean old-fashioned hate that didn't really end with that much hate. It ended more with a sign of respect. I was at the game. It was freaking cold as could be. And Georgia came out and they looked like absolute dog. Tech was wiping the floor with Georgia. I mean, absolutely just having their way. Haynes King played the game of his life. There was talk, early in the week that he was only going to even play part-time and Aaron Philo was going to play a lot. Haynes King played the whole game, and he was a warrior out there. I know his shoulder was still messed up, and he managed to throw for 300 yards because Georgia couldn't figure out how to stop a tight end drag to save their lives. But he was also the focus of their rushing game, and Georgia Tech absolutely dominated Georgia the way that you would want to dominate a Georgia team, which is limit their possessions, hold the ball, and when they make mistakes, take advantage. It was an ugly game. Georgia was down 17-0 at half. They missed a field goal right before half, and that was their only real sign of life in the first half. But then the game continued on, and Georgia got some life going there in the second half. And then the game really started to happen when in the fourth quarter, Georgia had scored to get within a touchdown. Georgia Tech got the ball back, went right down the field. Like Georgia wasn't even covering. Tech scored to go up 14 with roughly 5 minutes left. And at that point, it was cold and a lot of people started leaving. And I'll admit I left, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But that's when the game really kicked up.
So Tech deserved to win this game. By all accounts, they should have won this game. They outplayed Georgia. They outcoached Georgia and just dominated. I mean, beat the ever-living dog out of the dogs. It was brutal to watch. It was as bad as the first half against Alabama. Just, my God, what's going on? I mean, it didn't feel like it was going to be out of reach until we missed the field goal and had 0 points going into halftime.
Yeah, I think the difference you said there, the reason it didn't feel as bad or out of reach at the beginning of that Alabama game was we weren't giving up huge explosive plays the way they were at Alabama. It wasn't 80-yard touchdowns, but it was 10 yards here, 15 yards there with no stop. And when they got to second and third down, they were converting. Georgia did okay, especially in the first half on first down. They were getting 2 or 3 yards, but then second and third down were rough.
Yeah. I want to bring this up. So Carson Beck is actually great.
And he's been great the last few weeks, for sure.
Great. 5 touchdown passes in this game. 5 against your rival. So after all the interceptions and all the drama and all this other stuff, he finishes with 28 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. That's a pretty doggone good ratio. Led the SEC in touchdown passes. Just an amazing season that he's had. Even with all the ups and downs, you can definitely tell over these past few games that he actually learned from those mistakes. And that's a sign of a really good player, in my opinion, to be able to do that. And to do it with an O-line and a receiving core that have frankly not been very good. They just haven't. At the beginning of the season, Georgia could pass block all day long and you had all the time in the world, but we couldn't run the ball. We have yet to be able to truly run the ball this whole season. And as the season goes on, we have injuries and the play just gets worse and worse and worse. And even in the game this week, it was rough to watch, especially that first half, because you had Arian Smith dropping passes, and it was just a calamity of errors there. So props to Carson Beck for, being extremely resilient and hanging in there and actually ending up with a really great season. The one thing I would have liked to see And I know Kirby was letting his seniors play his senior day. I get all that. But we didn't have the same cast of characters that we've had the last 2 games on the offense. No Nitro Tuggle, no Sokovie White, none of the, I mean, barely saw London Humphreys at all. And I think that was one of the things that really stood out to me because, last week we were like, oh, I think we found our players that we're going to ride with the rest of the way. But then we just reverted back to what we had been doing.
I mean, I think part of that was in the first half, Georgia just didn't ever have the ball. They had a couple of 3-and-outs. They got the drive going, and then we had the fumble, by Dominic Lovett. So Georgia just didn't really have the ball in the first half. I think at one point the time of possession was 31 minutes to 13 minutes. So that would be late in the third quarter. Georgia straight up just didn't have the ball. A couple of drops a drop by Aaron Smith and a drop by Dominic Lovett and a fumble. I think Georgia only had the ball 4 times in the first half, 2 punts, a turnover, and a missed field goal.
And that's kind of my point. Different players make different outcomes, but it is what it is. Hopefully you get it figured out for Texas. But I'm not calling this a great win. It's a really good win. It shows that the Dogs have a lot of heart, resiliency, all the stuff that Kirby, talks about all the time. And it's absolutely true because they could have packed it in. 17-0, it's cold as hell. You're playing like crap, but they hung in there, had a few things go their way, and really the story of the game is the walk-ons, Dan
Right.
Jackson and Cash Jones.
Right. I think you said it there that this team is resilient. If you saw the highlight video that Georgia put out yesterday, Kirby's always got these messages that he leaves at halftime. And one of the messages that he said to the team as they were going back out for the second half, he said, if you don't believe, don't come out with us. He said, we believe in this team and we're going to get it done. And when the chips were down there, 5 minutes left in the game, Georgia moved the ball right down the field. They scored a touchdown. Tech got the ball back. They were near the point where they could probably close the game out. And as you said, who came through? Dirty Dan Jackson, laying into Haynes King, putting a hat on the ball. I don't believe all the controversy. It was not targeting. He put his helmet in the guy's chest on the ball. Haynes King lowered into him. He caught top of his helmet, caught Haynes King's face mask because he was leaning into it. But he's not a defensive receiver. He's running with the ball toward the line. Perfect hit. Georgia recovers the ball, gets the tying touchdown. And then we head to overtime. And man, what an overtime it was. Both teams traded scores there in the first 2 overtimes. As you mentioned, London Humphreys showed up there in overtime, caught the touchdown.
Finally.
And then it became a game of who cannot make 2-point conversions because neither team could. Starting in the second overtime, go for 2 after touchdowns. Both teams were stopped. And then over the next 6 overtime periods, there were 3 successful 2-point conversions out of 12. It's insane.
2-point conversions are hard.
2-point conversions are hard, but you would think the way that Tech had ran the ball the entire game and moved the line that they should have just been running the ball. But I think the reason they didn't is Haynes King was dead. Like, he had nothing left. There's the joke online that showed the, college football video game where it shows the player's body. And it was like, this is Haynes King, and the whole body was red. Like, that dude, like, if you saw him in the post game, I mean, he had nothing left. He carried the ball 30 times, and he threw it like 25 times. Like,
he took an absolute beating, and he showed out. I mean, Haynes King, absolute dog.
Yeah, I mean, people forget he was one of the top players in the country coming out of high school, and he went to Texas A&M and he got hurt. Like, and he was in a bad situation with Jimbo Fisher. Like, he was never a bad player, and he went to Tech and he was good last year. Just, it was their first full year under Key, trying to get away from the mess that Jeff Collins had left there. He's a good player. He said it in the press conference, he's tired of losing these games, because you would be too. But man, when Georgia finally got, they had their backs against the wall there. They had to save themselves a couple of times, and finally, when they gave that ball to Nate Frazier and Frazier got into the end zone, Georgia won the game. A game, like you said, that they probably didn't deserve to win, but they still won. And that's the difference between what you saw across college football the last 2 weekends, really, this season. It is teams playing against those that shouldn't beat them, that didn't have business to, but were in games, and those teams lost. Ohio State lost. Alabama getting their tar beat out of them at Oklahoma. Things like that. Georgia found a way to win. Whether you want to look at this Georgia team and say they're flawed, they absolutely are. But they also have the ability at times to be the best team in the country. They showed it in that second half against Alabama, and they certainly showed it in the last few minutes against Georgia Tech.
Man, the overtime periods, that was the most stressful football I think I've ever watched, because it's not like you're have a full drive where, you're kind of watching everything is do or die. And it's right then, and then it happens, and then you got to do it again, and then rinse and repeat. So by the end of all this, I don't think I didn't go to sleep till like 2 a.m. just because I was so amped up.
Yeah. And so I mentioned it earlier that we thought the game was over and it was cold. So we left with 5 minutes left. And most people in the last couple of days are like, oh, I can't believe you left. But the decision to leave ended up giving me an experience that I haven't really had in a long time. Now, when you think back to when you were a kid, before the days of the internet and cell phones and stuff, if you were in the car and there was a big sporting event going on, you listened to the game on the radio. And you could really listen. You could visualize what you're happening. But we've grown so used to having cell phones and score updates and stuff like that. When was the last time you actually sat down and listened to a sporting event and paid attention to it on the radio? Because that's what I did.
It's been a while.
Because that's what I did on Saturday night in the car.
I don't think I've listened to a Georgia football game on the radio for an extended period of time since Larry Munson passed away.
Right. And so, being in the car as this was unfolding, and it was different because it was overtime and it was 2-point conversions. It's not like there's a big field. You can visualize what's happening. And so we were in the car listening on every single play. And when Georgia finally won, we were screaming in the car on 316. Like, it's just a different experience. So in some ways, I'm disappointed that I didn't stay. But man, I was cold. But I had an experience that I haven't had in a while. And it was cool and it was different. And so for that, I'm thankful that we made that decision. And plus, I got to watch the highlights when I got home. But the key was that we won. Great game for Georgia.
I did love the Scott Howard call when Frazier ran it in. He goes, and Frazier scores the touchdown or extra point or whatever you want to call it. I think awesome. Shout out to my daughter. She watched every minute of the game with me, and she was probably the most positive person in the house about the whole situation. So I was on a group text with some of my tech friends, and I started taking the strategy of, I'm just going to keep telling them, all right, Tech's going to win this. Tech's going to stop Georgia here. Oh, there ain't no way Georgia comes back. And my daughter's getting on to me like, Dad, you need to be positive. It's like, it's okay, honey. This is a strategy.
Well, yeah. Well, all right. Well, that'll wrap us up. We will be back next week to cover everything that happened, the fallout, and to cover what we'll have as our first 12-team college football playoff bracket. Once again, thanks everybody for watching the show and listening. If you like us, leave us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.